3:47 in the morning. That's when my phone started screaming like a banshee, jerking me out of the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. The emergency dispatcher's voice cut through the static, sharp and urgent. "We've got multiple juveniles in the water at Pine Lake. Boat capsized during a party. Need immediate water rescue response." I was already moving, muscle memory from 15 years of emergency response kicking in before my brain fully caught up. Bare feet hit cold hardwood, and I grabbed my keys from the nightstand. The metallic jingle echoed through my dark house as I rushed toward the back door, pulling on boots over my pajama pants. That's when everything went sideways. The padlock on my equipment shed gleamed silver in the moonlight, brand new and bigger than my fist. A laminated notice hung from the metal hasp, fluttering in the night breeze like some twisted party decoration. My hands shook as I tore it down, reading by the glow of my phone's flashlight. Property of Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Equipment confiscated per violation of Article 15.3, Unauthorized Commercial Operations. Contact Board President Karen Mitchell for retrieval procedures. Karen Mitchell. The woman lived exactly 1 mile from here in her pristine colonial, probably sleeping soundly in her king-size bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, completely unaware that somewhere out on the dark water, kids were screaming for help, kids who might not make it to sunrise if I couldn't get to my kayaks. I'd been running water rescues on Pine Lake for 3 years, saved 23 people, including a 6-year-old who'd fallen through ice last winter and Karen's neighbor's golden retriever that got caught in a riptide. Never charged a dime, never asked for thanks. Just did what needed doing when the county's so-called professional rescue team couldn't make it in time. But apparently that made me a criminal. My phone buzzed again, text from dispatch. ETA to scene? I stared at that locked shed, at my rescue kayaks sitting useless behind steel and bureaucracy, and felt something cold settle in my stomach. Something that had nothing to do with the October night air cutting through my thin t-shirt. Here's the thing about emergencies. They don't care about your homeowners association bylaws. They don't wait for you to fill out forms or schedule committee meetings or follow proper procedures. When someone's drowning, you have seconds, not hours. And right now, every second I wasted standing in my backyard was another second those kids stayed in water cold enough to kill them. I grabbed my bolt cutters from the garage. The metal sang as the jaws bit through that shiny new lock, sparks flying in the darkness. If Karen Mitchell wanted to play games with paperwork, she'd pick the wrong night and the wrong guy to mess with. The shed door swung open with a familiar creak, and there they were, my 2 rescue kayaks, sitting exactly where I had left them yesterday afternoon. 16 feet of bright orange fiberglass that had pulled more people out of this lake than the county's $1 million rescue boat, which was currently sitting in a repair dock 30 miles away with a blown engine. I loaded the first kayak onto my truck with practiced efficiency, every movement automatic after years of midnight callouts. Paddles, life jackets, rescue rope, first aid kit, the routine that had become second nature. That's when I heard the sound that changed everything. A car door slammed in Karen Mitchell's driveway, followed by hurried footsteps on gravel and a woman's voice, high and panicked, talking fast into a phone. "I don't care what time it is, Randy. Wake them up. My son went to some party at the lake, and now there's boats and sirens and... What do you mean they're not responding? This is an emergency." I froze with my hands on the kayak's bow, pieces clicking together in my mind like puzzle pieces finding their places. Karen's 17-year-old son, Tyler, the kid who drove his father's BMW too fast through the neighborhood and never met a party he wouldn't crash. The same kid who was probably out there right now, treading water in 40-degree lake water, wondering why the adults who were supposed to keep him safe had chosen tonight to play political games. You ever have one of those moments where the universe shows you its sense of humor, where the cosmic joke becomes so obvious you can't help but laugh, even when there's nothing funny about it? I lifted that kayak onto my shoulders and started walking toward the water, Karen Mitchell's panicked voice echoing across the quiet neighborhood behind me. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but irony doesn't save lives. The water was going to be cold enough to kill in 15 minutes, and the county rescue team was still 20 minutes out. Math like that doesn't lie. As I reached the water's edge, launching my kayak into Pine Lake's black water, I could hear Karen's voice getting more frantic, more desperate. She was learning what I'd tried to tell the Homeowners Association board 6 months ago, that emergencies don't follow schedules and bureaucracy doesn't float. But tonight, someone was going to learn that lesson the hard way. The paddle cut through black water like a knife through silk, each stroke carrying me deeper into the nightmare unfolding on Pine Lake. Emergency lights from 3 different agencies painted the shoreline in reds and blues, their reflections dancing across the water like some twisted light show. I could hear them before I could see them, kids calling for help, their voices thin and desperate in the cold night air, the sound every rescue worker learns to dread, because it means you're running out of time. My kayak sliced through the darkness toward the cluster of lights where the county's rescue boat should have been. Instead, I found Sheriff Deputy Martinez standing waist-deep in freezing water, trying to coordinate a rescue with equipment that belonged in a swimming pool, not a lake emergency. "Brennan!" Martinez shouted when he spotted my orange kayak cutting through his searchlight beam. "Thank God. We've got 6 kids in the water, hypothermia setting in fast. The rescue boat's still 15 minutes out." 6 kids. I did the math in my head while I paddled. 15 minutes in water, this cold meant unconsciousness, maybe worse. The human body shuts down fast when it hits 40-degree water. I'd seen it happen before. "Where are they?" I called back, already scanning the dark water for bobbing heads. 3 over by the fallen tree, 2 more near the dock pilings. The 6th one, Martinez's voice cracked. "We lost visual on him 5 minutes ago." That's when I spotted them. 3 teenagers clinging to a partially submerged log about 50 yards from shore, their lips already blue in the searchlight glare. One of them I recognized immediately. Tyler Mitchell, Karen's golden boy. The kid who'd never worked a day in his life, but somehow always had money for the newest iPhone and the loudest parties. Right now, he looked like every other scared 17-year-old who'd made a stupid decision and was paying the price for it. I reached them in 30 seconds, my kayak sliding alongside that log like it was choreographed. Training kicked in. Assess, prioritize, act. The girl was hypothermic and barely conscious. Tyler was fighting to keep his friend's head above water. The 3rd kid, a boy I didn't recognize, was losing his grip fast. "Listen to me," I said, my voice cutting through their panic like a blade. "I'm going to get you out of here, but you need to do exactly what I say. No heroes, no arguments. Understand?" Tyler nodded, his teeth chattering so hard I could hear them clicking. "My mom? She's probably freaking out." "Your mom can freak out after you're breathing on dry land," I told him, already pulling the first rescue rope from my kayak. "Right now, we focus on staying alive." Getting 3 hypothermic teenagers into a single-person kayak isn't something they teach in rescue school, but you learn to improvise when lives are on the line. I got the girl secured first. She was closest to losing consciousness, then worked on getting the boys stabilized enough for the trip back to shore. That's when my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood run colder than the lake water. It was from Randy Black, the developer who'd been sniffing around our neighborhood for months, trying to buy up waterfront property for some luxury resort project. The same Randy Black who'd been having very cozy conversations with certain Homeowners Association board members about modernizing our community. The message was short and sweet. "Heard you're playing hero again tonight. Hope you have good insurance." I stared at that text for exactly 3 seconds before I deleted it and got back to work. But something about those words, about the timing, made my skin crawl in ways that had nothing to do with the October night air. You know that feeling when you realize the game you thought you were playing has completely different rules than you understood? When you discovered that the people you trusted to have your back were busy sharpening knives for it instead? I was starting to get that feeling. The trip back to shore took 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. Tyler and his friends huddled against each other in the makeshift rescue configuration I'd jerry-rigged, their body heat barely enough to keep them conscious. Every paddle stroke brought us closer to the emergency lights, closer to safety, closer to warmth. But it also brought us closer to answers I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. As we reached the shallow water where Martinez was waiting with emergency blankets and paramedics, I could see Karen Mitchell pacing the shoreline like a caged animal, her phone pressed to her ear and her free hand gesturing wildly at anyone who would listen. "I don't care what it costs," she was shouting. "I want a full investigation into how this happened. Someone's going to pay for this." The paramedics took over from there, wrapping the kids in thermal blankets and loading them into the back of ambulances for the trip to county medical. Standard hypothermia protocol. They'd be fine in a few hours, maybe have some interesting stories to tell their grandkids someday. But as I watched Karen Mitchell rush toward the ambulance carrying her son, something she said to the sheriff caught my attention. This is exactly why we need proper oversight of water activities in this community. Professional services only. No more vigilante rescues by unqualified residents. Vigilante rescues. That's what she called saving her son's life. I was still processing that when Martinez walked over, shaking his head and looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "Hell of a thing, Brennan," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Without you out there tonight, we'd be dragging bodies instead of treating hypothermia." "Just doing what needed doing," I replied. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying Karen's words and Randy Black's text, trying to connect dots that I hoped wouldn't connect. "Well, whatever political BS is happening with your homeowners association," Martinez continued, "you saved lives tonight. That's what matters." Political BS. If only he knew how deep that particular rabbit hole went. As the emergency vehicles started pulling away from the lake, their lights fading into the distance, I found myself standing alone on the shore with my kayak, and a growing certainty that tonight's rescue was just the beginning of something much bigger. Something that was going to get very ugly, very fast. And somewhere in the darkness behind me, I could swear I heard the sound of a car engine starting up, followed by tires crunching slowly on gravel, as if someone had been watching the whole thing from the shadows. The Homeowners Association emergency meeting was called for 8 a.m. sharp, exactly 6 hours after I'd pulled Karen Mitchell's son out of Pine Lake. The community center smelled like burnt coffee and fresh anger, a combination I'd learned to recognize over the years. 47 residents packed into a space designed for 25, their faces a mixture of gratitude and suspicion that told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to go. Karen Mitchell sat at the head table like a queen holding court, flanked by Randy Black and 2 other board members I didn't recognize. Funny how Randy had managed to show up to an emergency meeting called with 6 hours' notice, almost like he'd been expecting it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice carrying that particular tone politicians use when they're about to explain why up is actually down. "We're here to address last night's unfortunate incident and the serious safety violations that occurred." Safety violations. That's what she called saving her son's life. I sat in the back row, still wearing the same clothes I'd had on during the rescue, lake water stains and all. Let them see exactly who they were talking about. Let them remember that 6 hours ago, I was the guy they were praying would show up. "Mr. Brennan," Karen continued, turning her attention to me like a hawk spotting a field mouse, "violated multiple community covenants last night. Destruction of homeowners association as property, operation of unauthorized watercraft, and conducting commercial activities without proper permits." The room erupted in murmurs. I caught fragments of conversations, some defending me, others questioning whether I'd actually broken rules they'd never bothered to read. Mrs. Henderson, whose granddaughter I'd pulled from the lake 2 summers ago, raised her hand. "Karen, with all due respect, the man saved 6 kids last night, including your son." "Which is exactly the problem," Karen shot back. "What if something had gone wrong? What if one of those children had been injured during an unauthorized rescue attempt? The liability exposure for this community would be astronomical." Randy Black leaned forward, his expensive suit and perfect teeth, making him look like every slick developer who'd ever tried to explain why tearing down your house was really in your best interest. "Mrs. Mitchell raises an excellent point," he said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as fake. "I've been conducting a comprehensive risk assessment of this community's water activities, and the insurance implications are staggering. Did you know your current homeowners association policy doesn't cover rescue operations conducted by untrained residents?" Untrained. I'd spent 15 years as a paramedic before my back gave out, 5 years doing water rescue training with the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and countless hours on this lake pulling people out of trouble. But sure, let's call me untrained. "What Mr. Black is suggesting," Karen continued, "is that we need professional oversight. His company, Lakefront Development Services, has offered to provide comprehensive water safety management for our community." There it was, the real agenda, dressed up in safety concerns and liability fears. Randy Black didn't just want to manage our water safety. He wanted to control access to the lake and Karen Mitchell was helping him do it. "How much?" called out Jim Torres from the middle of the room. Jim was a county tax assessor who knew the smell of a sweetheart deal from 50 yards away. "Initially, just $15,000 per year," Randy replied, like that was pocket change for a community where half the residents were on fixed incomes, plus a nominal fee for equipment and staffing. Nominal fee. In developer speak, that usually meant bend over and grab your ankles. I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn toward me. The lake water stains on my clothes caught the fluorescent light, and I could smell the pine and diesel fuel that had soaked into my jacket during the rescue. "Can I ask a question?" I said, my voice carrying easily across the hushed room. Karen's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Of course, Mr. Brennan. Where exactly was this professional water safety team at 3:47 this morning when those kids needed help?" The silence stretched long enough for everyone to do the math in their heads. Randy Black shifted in his chair, his perfect composure slipping just enough for me to see the irritation underneath. "Emergency services take time to deploy properly," he said. "Professional protocols exist for a reason." "Professional protocols," I repeated. "Like the county rescue boat that's been broken down for 2 months, or the Coast Guard station that's 45 minutes away on a good day?" "Mr. Brennan," Karen interjected, "you're deflecting from the real issue here. You destroyed homeowners association property. You operated equipment without authorization. You exposed this community to massive legal liability." "I saved 6 lives," I said simply, "including your son's." That's when things got interesting. A man I'd never seen before stood up near the front of the room, his cheap suit and nervous energy marking him as either a reporter or a lawyer. In this context, probably both. "Ma'am," he said to Karen, "I'm David Stone from the county prosecutor's office. I just wanted to clarify something for the record." Karen's face went white so fast I thought she might faint. "Mr. Brennan's actions last night fall under Good Samaritan protections," Stone continued. "Destruction of property during a life-saving emergency isn't criminal. It's legally protected. As for liability, any homeowners association that punishes residents for saving lives would face some very interesting civil rights questions." Randy Black was suddenly very interested in his phone, scrolling through messages with the kind of intense focus people use when they're pretending not to listen to conversations that are destroying their carefully laid plans. "Furthermore," Stone added, "I've been reviewing this community's covenant restrictions, and I can't find any language that actually prohibits water rescue activities. What I do find are several references to community safety being a shared responsibility." Karen Mitchell's political career was imploding in real time, and I was getting a front row seat to the show. But here's the thing about cornered animals. They're most dangerous when they think they're about to lose everything. Karen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor like nails on a chalkboard. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced. "The board will reconvene in closed session to discuss our legal options." Legal options. That sounded like a threat wrapped in bureaucratic language. As residents filed out of the community center, most of them stopping to shake my hand or pat my shoulder, I noticed Randy Black hanging back, having what looked like a very intense conversation with Karen Mitchell and someone else I couldn't see clearly. That someone turned out to be Dr. Jennifer Clark, my former colleague from the county medical center, the woman who'd signed off on my disability paperwork 3 years ago when my back finally gave out after 15 years of lifting patients and equipment. The woman who knew better than anyone exactly how qualified I was to save lives in the water. And apparently, she'd just thrown her support behind the people trying to stop me from doing it. You ever have one of those moments where you realize the knife in your back was put there by someone you trusted? Someone who knew exactly where it would hurt the most. I was having that moment right now. 3 days after the community center showdown, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. The caller ID showed Jennifer Clark's name, and for a split second, I thought maybe she was calling to explain herself. Maybe there was some reasonable explanation for why she'd been huddled with Karen Mitchell and Randy Black after publicly questioning my rescue methods. I was wrong. "Alex," her voice was crisp and professional, the tone she used to use when delivering bad news to patients' families. "We need to talk. There's been a complaint filed with the state medical board about your rescue activities." The coffee mug slipped from my fingers, hitting the kitchen floor with a crack that echoed through my quiet house. Brown liquid spread across the tile like spilled blood. What kind of complaint? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. Practicing medicine without a current license. Performing medical interventions outside your scope of authority. The complaint alleges you administered first aid and made treatment decisions during the lake rescue without proper certification. My paramedic license had expired 2 years ago when my disability made it impossible to maintain the required continuing education. I'd let it lapse because I figured I was done with emergency medicine forever. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back into the fights you thought you'd left behind. Ajen, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You know as well as I do that Good Samaritan laws protect basic life-saving measures. I pulled kids out of freezing water and kept them warm until paramedics arrived. That's not practicing medicine. That's being human. The complaint suggests otherwise. It claims you performed diagnostic assessments, made treatment decisions about hypothermia protocols, and advised emergency personnel on medical procedures. Every word she spoke was technically true and completely twisted. Yes, I'd assessed the kids for hypothermia symptoms. Yes, I'd told the paramedics what I'd observed about their conditions. Yes, I'd drawn on 15 years of medical experience to keep 3 teenagers alive until professional help arrived. But the way Jennifer was describing it made me sound like some kind of medical vigilante, operating outside the law and putting people at risk. Who filed the complaint? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. I can't tell you that. It's confidential until the investigation is complete. But you can tell me it exists, which means someone wanted me to know about it. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. Alex, Jennifer said finally, I'm calling as a friend. This could get serious. Medical board investigations can result in fines, civil liability, even criminal charges if they determine you were practicing without a license. Friend? Right. Friends don't usually help build cases against each other, but maybe I'd missed that chapter in the friendship handbook. I appreciate the heads up, I told her, then hung up before she could say anything else that would make me want to throw the phone through the window. I spent the next 2 hours pacing my house like a caged animal, trying to figure out how saving lives had turned into a criminal investigation. The walls felt like they were closing in, covered with commendations and photos from my paramedic days. Awards for life-saving actions that were apparently now being used as evidence against me. That's when I noticed the car. A black sedan with tinted windows parked across the street from my house. It had been there when I got up, still there during my phone call with Jennifer, and still there now as I watched from my living room window. Private security or investigators, probably hired by Randy Black to document my daily activities. Build a pattern of suspicious behavior to support whatever narrative they were constructing about the dangerous amateur who threatened public safety. I grabbed my keys and headed for the front door. Time to have a conversation. The sedan pulled away before I could reach the street, but not before I caught a glimpse of the license plate. Government tags. Not private security after all. Someone official was taking an interest in my activities. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Check your mailbox. The envelope was thick and official looking, the return address showing the county planning department. Inside was a cease and desist order, signed by someone named Patricia Walsh, demanding I immediately stop all water rescue activities, pending a full safety review of my equipment and methods. The order cited multiple violations: operating watercraft without commercial permits, conducting rescue operations without proper insurance, creating liability exposure for county emergency services, and my personal favorite, interfering with professional emergency response protocols. Interfering by saving lives while the professionals were still trying to find their equipment. But here's what really caught my attention. The signature at the bottom. Patricia Walsh, Director of Water Safety Compliance, a position that, according to the letterhead, had been created just 3 days ago. 3 days ago, the same day as the Homeowners Association meeting, where Randy Black had offered his professional water safety services. I sat on my front porch, reading that cease and desist order for the 3rd time, when Bill Thornberry came shuffling up my driveway. Bill was the unofficial keeper of Pine Lake's institutional memory, an 80-year-old retired engineer who lived on the water for 40 years and knew everyone's business better than they knew it themselves. I heard you got some official attention, he said, settling into the porch chair next to mine with the careful movements of a man whose joints had logged too many miles. The news travels fast around here. faster when it's interesting. Bill pulled a manila folder from inside his jacket. And this is very interesting indeed. He handed me the folder, and I opened it to find photocopies of public records, property transfers, and what looked like corporate filings, the kind of paperwork that only made sense if you knew what you were looking for. Randy Black's been busy, Bill said. Real busy. That water safety company he mentioned at the meeting, incorporated 6 months ago. Guess who the silent partners are? I flipped through the documents, seeing names I recognized from the Homeowners Association Board, the County Planning Commission, and the local Chamber of Commerce, a whole network of people who stood to benefit from privatizing lake access and charging residents for services they'd been getting for free. There's more, Bill continued. That new water safety compliance office, funded by a federal grant that Randy Black helped write. Amazing how these things work out, isn't it? Amazing wasn't the word I would have used. Systematic corruption was more accurate. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Bill looked out at Pine Lake, its surface smooth as glass in the morning light. Because 40 years ago, this community came together to buy this land and create something special. A place where people looked out for each other, where your neighbor's problem was your problem too. Men like Randy Black want to turn that into just another revenue stream. He stood up slowly, his knees creaking like old hinges. I've seen what happens to communities that let developers like him take over. They promise professional services and modern conveniences, and they deliver bills you can't afford and rules you can't follow. As Bill walked back toward his own house, I sat there with his folder of evidence and a growing understanding of just how deep this rabbit hole went. The lake rescue hadn't been the beginning of this fight. It had been the excuse they needed to finish something they'd started months ago. My phone rang again, unknown number, but this time I answered. Mr. Brennan? The voice was young, nervous. This is Jake Miller from the county inspector's office. I think we need to meet. Jake Miller. The name sounded familiar, like something I should remember but couldn't quite place. What about? I asked. About the documents I've been asked to falsify, and about what's really happening to your community. The line went quiet for a long moment, and I could hear traffic in the background, like he was calling from a parking lot or a roadside. Mr. Brennan, he said finally, I think you're in a lot more trouble than you know, but I also think you might be the only one who can stop what's coming. What's coming? That sounded ominous as hell, and given everything that had happened in the past few days, I was pretty sure it was about to get a lot worse. Jake Miller turned out to be 28 years old, with nervous eyes and the kind of hands that shook when he thought nobody was looking. We met at a diner 15 miles outside town, the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, and nobody asked questions about why two strangers were huddled over documents in a back booth. I've been working for the county for 3 years, Jake began, sliding a manila envelope across the Formica table. Mostly routine stuff, building permits, zoning compliance, water quality testing, nothing that would get me killed. Killed. That was an interesting choice of words. 2 weeks ago, my supervisor handed me this. He tapped the envelope. Said it was a special project, high priority, needed to be handled with absolute discretion. What he meant was, he wanted me to doctor the water quality reports for Pine Lake. I opened the envelope and found myself staring at 2 sets of laboratory results for the same water samples, taken from the same locations, on the same dates. The first set showed normal levels across all categories: pH, bacterial content, chemical contamination. Standard readings for a healthy lake ecosystem. The second set told a completely different story. Dangerous bacteria levels, chemical contamination from residential runoff, pH levels that would make the water unsafe for swimming or fishing. The kind of numbers that would trigger immediate health department intervention and mandatory lake closure. The second set is what I was supposed to file with the state, Jake continued, along with a recommendation for emergency remediation by a qualified environmental contractor. Let me guess, I said. Randy Black's company happens to specialize in environmental remediation. Lakefront Development Services has a subsidiary called Pine Valley Environmental. They've got contracts pending with 3 other communities for similar work. Always seems to happen after water quality emergencies that require immediate professional intervention. The pattern was becoming clear. Create a crisis, offer a solution, profit from both ends while the community got squeezed in the middle. It was elegant in its simplicity and absolutely ruthless in its execution. "Why didn't you file the fake report?" I asked. Jake's laugh was bitter. "Because my little sister almost drowned in Pine Lake 5 years ago. Some guy in a kayak pulled her out and did CPR until the paramedics arrived. Saved her life." He looked up at me. "That guy was you, wasn't it?" Memory clicked into place. A 7-year-old girl with pigtails, blue lips, and parents who sobbed with relief when she started breathing again. I'd forgotten about it until now. It had just been another rescue, another life saved, another day at the lake. But Jake Miller had never forgotten. "After the lake rescue last week," he continued, "my supervisor got very insistent about those water quality reports, said there was pressure from above to get them filed immediately. When I asked for more time to verify the numbers, he told me my job was to do what I was told, not to play scientist. So you called me instead." "I called you because I think they're planning something bigger than fake water reports. Yesterday I was asked to prepare condemnation proceedings for 12 properties along the lakeshore, including yours." Condemnation, the legal process that let government seize private property for the public good, usually with compensation that was a fraction of market value. Once the government took your land, they could sell it to private developers for whatever price they wanted to accept. "On what grounds?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Environmental contamination requiring immediate remediation, unsafe conditions posing a threat to public health, properties too damaged to be safely inhabited." Jake pulled out another document. "There's also a provision for emergency seizure if residents refuse to evacuate voluntarily. And Randy Black just happens to be the qualified contractor ready to purchase contaminated properties at below market rates and turn them into luxury waterfront development. The Pine Lake Resort and Marina, exclusive access, private security, professional water safety services, starting prices at $800,000 for a 1-bedroom condo." I sat back in the diner booth, watching steam rise from my untouched coffee and trying to process the scope of what they were planning. It wasn't just about stopping my rescue activities. It was about stealing an entire community and turning it into a playground for people who could afford to pay Randy Black's prices. "There's something else," Jake said. "The medical board complaint against you, it came from Dr. Jennifer Clark, but she didn't initiate it. Someone else asked her to file it, using information that had to come from your medical records." "What kind of information?" "Details about your disability rating, the specific back injuries that ended your paramedic career, medications you were prescribed 3 years ago, stuff that's supposed to be confidential." The betrayal hit harder than I'd expected. Jennifer Clark hadn't just helped build a case against me. She'd violated federal privacy laws to do it, using my medical history as ammunition for people trying to destroy my community. "Who asked her to file it?" "I don't know. But whoever it was had access to your medical records and knew exactly what information would be most damaging in a professional misconduct investigation." My phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but something told me I needed to answer it. "Mr. Brennan?" The voice was professional, neutral, the kind of tone that usually preceded very bad news. "This is Agent Sarah Blake with the Environmental Protection Agency. I need to inform you that Pine Lake has been designated as a priority contamination site, requiring immediate remediation. All recreational activities are suspended effective immediately." "Based on what evidence?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. "Water quality reports filed by the county inspector's office show dangerous contamination levels. For your safety and the safety of your community, please avoid any contact with lake water until remediation is complete." "How long will that take?" "The qualified contractor estimates 18 to 24 months for full environmental restoration, possibly longer depending on the extent of contamination discovered during the initial assessment." 2 years, long enough for Randy Black to buy up condemned properties, get his development permits approved, and turn Pine Lake into his private money machine. By the time residents were allowed back, there wouldn't be anything left to come back to. "Agent Blake," I said, "I think you should know that those water quality reports are fraudulent." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly long enough for me to realize I'd just made a very dangerous accusation against very powerful people. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Brennan. I hope you have evidence to support it." "I do." "Then I suggest you bring that evidence to my office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. And Mr. Brennan, Until this matter is resolved, I strongly advise you to avoid any activities that might be construed as interfering with a federal environmental investigation." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering if I'd just signed my own death warrant. Jake Miller was watching me with the expression of a man who'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. "They're moving fast now," he said. "Faster than I expected, which means they're either very confident or very scared. Or both." "Yeah, or both." He stood up, leaving a $10 bill on the table for coffee we hadn't touched. "Alex, I want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, I'm going to tell the truth, all of it, even if it costs me my job. It might cost you more than your job. I know, but some things are worth the risk." As Jake Miller walked out of that diner and into whatever consequences awaited him, I sat alone with the evidence of a conspiracy that reached from county government to federal agencies. Evidence that could save my community or get me killed, depending on who I trusted with it. The smart play would be to walk away, take whatever compensation they offered for my condemned property, and start over somewhere else, somewhere Randy Black and his friends couldn't reach. But I'd never been particularly smart when it came to walking away from fights that mattered. And this one mattered more than they knew. The EPA office in the federal building downtown smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. I sat in Agent Sarah Blake's waiting area at 8:45 a.m., clutching Jake Miller's evidence folder and trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Agent Blake turned out to be a woman in her early 40s with steel gray hair and the kind of eyes that had seen too many environmental disasters caused by corporate greed. She led me into a conference room where two other people were already waiting, David Stone from the prosecutor's office, and someone I didn't recognize wearing a suit expensive enough to buy my house. "Mr. Brennan," Agent Blake began, "I'd like you to meet Thomas Crawford from the Department of Justice. He's here because your allegations yesterday triggered some very interesting database searches." Crawford opened a laptop and turned it toward me. The screen showed a map of the United States with red dots scattered across several states. Each dot represented what he called a lakefront development incident, communities where environmental emergencies had led to property condemnation and subsequent private development. 17 communities in the past 5 years, Crawford said, all following the same pattern: suspicious water quality reports, emergency contamination declarations, condemnation proceedings, and immediate sale to the same network of development companies. All connected to Randy Black? Not directly, but the money trail leads back to a holding company that owns shares in Lakefront Development Services, Pine Valley Environmental, and about a dozen other firms involved in what we're calling the Pine Lake Project. Agent Blake leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, what you stumbled into isn't just local corruption. It's organized crime with a very sophisticated understanding of environmental law and federal emergency procedures." I opened Jake Miller's folder and spread the documents across the conference table. The fake water quality reports, the condemnation paperwork, the corporate filings that showed Randy Black's connections to county officials and homeowners association board members. "Jake Miller risked his career to get you this information," I said. "Where is he now?" The silence in the room was answer enough. "Mr. Miller has been placed in protective custody," Crawford said finally. "After he contacted you yesterday, someone broke into his apartment and his county office. They were looking for something specific." "The original water quality reports?" "Among other things. Fortunately, Mr. Miller was smart enough to make copies and hide them in multiple locations. Less fortunately, his supervisor has accused him of falsifying official documents and stealing confidential files. The classic move: accuse your accuser of the crimes you committed, turn the whistleblower into the criminal, and let the system destroy itself from the inside." "What about the medical board complaint against me?" I asked. Agent Blake consulted her notes. "Filed by Dr. Jennifer Clark, but initiated by someone with access to your private medical records. We're investigating how that information was obtained and who requested it." "And the homeowners association?" "Karen Mitchell has been placed on administrative leave pending a federal investigation into misuse of community funds. Randy Black is currently unavailable for comment, and his offices were temporarily sealed this morning while we execute search warrants." For the first time in days, I felt like maybe the good guys were winning, but that feeling lasted exactly as long as it took Crawford to open another file on his laptop. Mr. Brennan, I need to show you something that changes the timeline significantly. The screen showed what looked like architectural plans, detailed blueprints for a luxury resort development. But these weren't recent drawings. The date stamp showed they had been created 18 months ago, long before Randy Black had ever approached the Homeowners Association about water safety services. The Pine Lake Resort was planned from the beginning, Crawford explained. The water safety concerns, the Homeowners Association restrictions, the environmental contamination reports, all of it was orchestrated to create the legal justification for property seizure. But why target my rescue activities specifically? Agent Blake answered that one. Because you were the unknown variable. Your rescue operations proved that Pine Lake was safe, that the community could handle its own emergency response, and that professional oversight wasn't necessary. You were undermining their entire narrative. So they tried to criminalize what I was doing. More than that, they tried to turn your greatest strength into a legal liability. Your medical training, your rescue experience, your commitment to helping people, all of it was twisted into evidence of reckless endangerment and unauthorized medical practice. The scope of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just wanted to stop me from conducting rescues. They'd wanted to destroy my reputation so completely that no one would believe anything I said about what was really happening to Pine Lake. What happens now? I asked. Crawford closed the laptop. Now we build a case that will shut down this entire operation and send some very powerful people to federal prison. But we need your help. What kind of help? The kind that might put you in danger. Agent Blake leaned back in her chair. Tomorrow night, there's an emergency county commission meeting to approve the Pine Lake remediation contract. Randy Black will be there, along with several other people we've been investigating. We need someone on the inside who can document what they say when they think they're among friends. You want me to wear a wire. We want you to attend that meeting as a concerned resident and record whatever conversations you can safely access. Nothing illegal, nothing that would put you at serious risk. Just be present and listen. And if they recognize me, if they know I've been talking to federal agents, Crawford and Blake exchanged a look that told me they had already considered that possibility. Mr. Brennan, Crawford said carefully, we won't lie to you. There is some risk involved. These people have demonstrated they're willing to break federal laws, violate civil rights, and destroy lives to protect their operation. But we also believe this meeting is our best opportunity to get the evidence we need to stop them permanently. I thought about Jake Miller, sitting in protective custody because he'd tried to do the right thing. I thought about the 17 other communities that had been victimized by this same scheme. I thought about Karen Mitchell's son, alive because I'd been there when he needed help, and about all the future emergencies that would go unanswered if Randy Black succeeded in privatizing access to Pine Lake. What do I need to do? Agent Blake smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Just be yourself, Mr. Brennan. Be the guy who cuts through locks to save drowning kids. Be the guy who asks inconvenient questions when powerful people are lying. Be the guy who doesn't back down when the stakes get high. And try not to get killed in the process. That too. As I left the federal building with a recording device smaller than a matchbook hidden in my jacket pocket, I realized that everything I'd been through, the Homeowners Association battles, the medical board complaint, the cease and desist orders, the environmental investigation, had been leading to this moment. Tomorrow night, I would walk into a room full of people who wanted me destroyed, and try to get them to confess their crimes while federal agents listened from a surveillance van parked outside. Have you ever had one of those moments where you realize you're about to do something that's either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, and you're not entirely sure which? I was having that moment right now. But sometimes, when everything you care about is on the line, the difference between brave and stupid doesn't matter as much as the difference between right and wrong. And this was definitely about right and wrong. The county commission meeting was held in the basement of the municipal building, a windowless room that smelled like old coffee and municipal corruption. 27 people showed up, which was about 20 more than usual for these things. Word had gotten around that something big was happening with Pine Lake. I sat in the back row, the federal recording device feeling like it weighed 50 pounds in my jacket pocket. Agent Blake and her team were parked outside in a surveillance van, listening to everything through an earpiece I couldn't even feel. The technology was impressive, but it didn't make me any less nervous about what I was about to do. Randy Black entered the room like he owned it, which, given what I'd learned about his political connections, he probably did. He was followed by 3 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate boardroom and into the wrong meeting. Behind them came Karen Mitchell, her face pale but her posture defiant, like a politician who knew she was caught but wasn't ready to admit it yet. Commissioner Patricia Walsh called the meeting to order with the kind of brisk efficiency that suggested she wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible. The agenda showed only one item: emergency approval of Pine Lake environmental remediation contract. "Ladies and gentlemen," Walsh began, "we're here tonight to address the serious contamination issue at Pine Lake that poses an immediate threat to public health and safety." She launched into a presentation about bacterial contamination, chemical runoff, and pH levels that made Pine Lake sound like a toxic waste dump. Every number she cited matched the fake reports in Jake Miller's evidence folder, and every conclusion she drew pointed toward the same solution: immediate professional remediation by qualified contractors. Randy Black stood to address the commission, his voice smooth and confident. "Commissioners, Pine Valley Environmental is prepared to begin immediate remediation work at Pine Lake. Our preliminary assessment indicates the contamination is extensive but manageable, provided we can begin work within the next 30 days. "What about the affected properties?" asked Commissioner Reynolds, a woman I'd met at a few community events who'd always seemed reasonable. "Unfortunately," Randy replied, "several properties along the lakeshore will need to be temporarily evacuated during the remediation process. Given the extent of contamination, we estimate the work will take 18 to 24 months. Temporarily evacuated. Right. For 2 years, while Randy Black's development company purchased condemned properties at rock-bottom prices and turned them into luxury condos. That's when I stood up. "Commissioner Walsh," I said, my voice carrying easily across the small room, "I have some questions about this contamination report." The room went dead quiet. Randy Black turned to look at me, his expression shifting from confidence to something that might have been concern. Karen Mitchell's face went white as a sheet. "Mr. Brennan," Walsh said, consulting her notes, "you're not scheduled to speak tonight. I'm a Pine Lake resident whose property is apparently contaminated with dangerous chemicals. I think I have a right to ask questions about the evidence." "What kind of questions?" This from Randy Black, who was trying to project calm authority but couldn't quite keep the edge out of his voice. I pulled out a folder, not Jake Miller's evidence, but copies of water quality reports I'd obtained through other channels. "I'm wondering why the contamination levels in your report are so different from the independent testing I had done last week." Randy's corporate smile faltered. "Independent testing by whom?" "State Environmental Laboratory. Same locations, same testing protocols, completely different results." I opened the folder and began reading. "pH levels normal. Bacterial content within acceptable ranges. No evidence of chemical contamination or industrial runoff." "That's impossible," Karen Mitchell interjected. "The county inspector's office confirmed dangerous contamination levels." "The county inspector's office filed a false report," I said simply, "and I can prove it." The room erupted in murmurs and shocked whispers. Commissioner Reynolds leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, that's a very serious accusation." "It's a very serious crime," I replied, "falsifying environmental reports to justify property seizure and benefit private developers." Randy Black was on his feet now, his composure finally cracking. "This is ridiculous. Mr. Brennan has been conducting unauthorized rescue operations, interfering with professional emergency services, and now he's making wild accusations to avoid accountability for his actions." "My actions?" I laughed, and it came out harder than I'd intended. "You mean saving 6 kids from hypothermia while your professional emergency services were nowhere to be found? You mean endangering lives by operating without proper training or authorization?" Karen Mitchell shot back. "You mean creating massive liability exposure for this community through reckless vigilante activities." And there it was, the confession Agent Blake had been hoping for, delivered with perfect clarity for the federal recording device in my pocket. "Vigilante activities," I repeated. "Like pulling your son out of freezing water at 3 in the morning because your homeowners association had confiscated my rescue equipment?" Karen's face went from white to red in about 2 seconds. "That equipment was seized because you were operating a commercial rescue service without permits or insurance." Commercial rescue service? Commissioner Reynolds looked confused. Mr. Brennan, do you charge for rescue operations? Never charge a dime in 3 years, I replied. Never will. Unlike Mr. Black's company, which wants $15,000 a year, plus fees to provide the same services I've been doing for free. Randy Black had heard enough. Commissioner Walsh, this is exactly the kind of disruptive behavior that makes professional oversight necessary. Mr. Brennan has demonstrated a pattern of disregarding authority, violating community covenants, and undermining legitimate safety protocols. Legitimate safety protocols, I said, like falsifying water quality reports to justify condemning private property. No one falsified anything. Randy's voice was getting louder, his careful political mask slipping away to reveal something ugly underneath. Those reports were filed by qualified county personnel following established testing procedures. Qualified county personnel like Jake Miller, who was ordered to doctor the results. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop. Randy Black realized he'd walked into a trap, but it was too late to back out now. Mr. Miller was terminated for falsifying official documents, Karen Mitchell said quickly, trying to control the damage. His allegations are the desperate accusations of a disgruntled former employee. Disgruntled enough to risk his career by telling the truth, I replied. Honest enough to refuse orders to file false reports that would destroy an entire community. Commissioner Reynolds was looking back and forth between Randy Black and me like she was watching a tennis match. Mr. Black, are you saying the water quality reports are accurate? Absolutely accurate, Randy replied, but sweat was beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Then you won't object to independent verification by the State Environmental Laboratory? Randy's pause lasted exactly long enough to hang himself. Well, additional testing would delay remediation efforts and put the community at greater risk. The community's been swimming in that lake for 40 years without getting sick, interrupted Bill Thornberry from the front row. Funny how it suddenly became a toxic waste dump, right when Mr. Black needed an excuse to buy up waterfront property. That's when Randy Black made his final mistake. Instead of trying to salvage the situation with more lies, he went on the attack. This entire community has been obstructing legitimate development efforts for months, he said, his voice rising with frustration and anger. Property values here are artificially low because of outdated infrastructure and amateur emergency services. The Pine Lake Resort project would bring jobs, tax revenue, and professional management to replace the kind of dangerous vigilante operations that nearly got people killed last week. There it was, the full confession, delivered in digital high definition to a room full of witnesses and a federal surveillance team. Commissioner Reynolds looked like she'd been slapped. Mr. Black, are you saying this environmental emergency is connected to your development project? Randy realized what he'd just said, but the damage was done. I'm saying this community needs professional oversight instead of amateur-hour rescue operations by unqualified residents. Unqualified residents like the paramedic who saved 6 lives while your professional services were getting their equipment out of the repair shop. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Residents shouting questions, commissioners demanding answers, Karen Mitchell trying to restore order, while Randy Black made increasingly desperate attempts to control a narrative that had completely escaped his grasp. I slipped out of the meeting during the confusion, knowing Agent Blake had everything she needed to shut down Randy Black's operation and send him to federal prison where he belonged. 3 weeks later, Randy Black was arrested on federal charges of conspiracy, fraud, and violation of civil rights. Karen Mitchell resigned from the Homeowners Association and moved to another state. The fake environmental emergency was officially rescinded, and Jake Miller got his job back with a commendation for integrity and public service. The Pine Lake community established a formal water safety volunteer program with me as the coordinator, complete with proper insurance and county recognition. We've conducted 12 rescues since then, including one where Karen Mitchell's replacement as HOA president personally thanked me for saving her grandson from a capsized kayak. The old GPS beacon from my ex-wife sits on my kitchen table now, not as a symbol of what I'd lost, but as a reminder of what I'd found. Sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought in courtrooms or corporate boardrooms. They're fought by ordinary people who refuse to let bureaucrats and developers destroy the communities they love. And sometimes, when you stand up to bullies who think their money and connections make them untouchable, you discover that the truth really can set you free, even if it scares the hell out of you first. If you're still with me after this whole crazy story, maybe drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and doing what's safe? Because I'll tell you what I learned. Sometimes they're the same thing, and sometimes they're not. But the choice you make defines who you are when it really counts. And that's a choice worth fighting for.